How far is Australia prepared to allow itself to be seen as a nation of censorship, where it has become an unwritten law and that censorship dominates all aspects of our lives, where freedom of speech and thought have been overtly killed, and persecution now underpins our social values and rules? It's now clear Australia has lost its way, and it's been because of poor leadership, no longer representing the foundations Australia was built on. We've railed against the government for its inaction against climate change. We've argued for Julian Assange's freedom and release. And Australians have despaired regarding the detention and treatment of refugees. And yet, we do nothing to support the right to be or not to be vaccinated. The shift may be so great, there's a chance we may never recover from the madness that's enshrouding us. If Australians were in doubt the country has lost the plot since COVID, then that doubt should have evaporated after the Djokovic debacle. Australians should be ashamed as to what Australia has become. Now, whether you agree with Djokovic's position on vaccines, his human rights have been abused. He's been hunted and persecuted by the federal government for expressing views he made 2 years ago. Opinions in any democratic society where free speech is encouraged is now anything but. Djokovic's comments now haunt him, and the federal government saw it as their right to make him a political example. Djokovic is a champion of freedom, and that's how he must be seen. His fight against censorship and control should be our fight also. If people like Djokovic don't speak up and free speech or opinion is allowed to be abused, then as a society, we are rapidly succumbing to darkness, which is why Djokovic must be applauded and supported, not vilified. Now, regardless of whether he's right or wrong, Scott Morrison, Alex Hawke and Kate Andrews saw things differently. They used Djokovic's comments to bludgeon him and humiliate him, to enforce their narrative and manufacture hysteria and fear and promote it as reason why Australians should support his deportation was disgraceful and desperate. Djokovic should have been allowed to showcase his talents and compete at the Australian Open, but he wasn't. Instead, he's become a political tool where the agenda of public manipulation was Morrison's single focus. Djokovic became Morrison's political bitch, a weapon to manipulate the minds of Australians. He has unwittingly become the catalyst for the federal government to soft launch its campaign for the pending federal election. COVID has unveiled the ugliness of humanity and given government and people licence to behave in a manner we would have found reprehensible just 5 years ago. Australia's sense of fairness has now been erased from our cultural psyche. It no longer exists, or that's at least how it seems. Djokovic is definitely a polarising figure. You don't get to be the best in the world if you're weak of mind or spirit. Now, many people perceive him as arrogant, others as self-assured and determined. Either way, Djokovic is entitled to hold a view. He's entitled to stand by his beliefs without being hunted down as ethnic minorities and intellectuals were 30 years ago, as fundamental Christians chase scientists out of town. His deportation from Australia sets a disturbing precedent and has definitely damaged our once highly regarded global reputation. Morrison has kicked it off a cliff. In any campaign to manufacture public support and turn it to your favour means running a campaign of lies and deceit, and that sits on Morrison. To run a campaign that describes Djokovic's presence during 2 weeks of the Open as a high-profile vaccine sceptic that may put lives and civil order at risk by stirring up anti-vaccine sentiment and disregard for COVID rules were fanciful and appalling. Those opinions are held by ministers in Morrison's own government when we see George Christensen, and he still sits on the bench. COVID rules, by the way, that are illogical and constantly changing, that make no sense and dictated by bureaucracy and not highly respected global health officers or science. It's a sad indictment that the judiciary, who are exempt from vaccine mandates, believed Djokovic's presence would turn Australians into vaccine sceptics. So how is, in an admission by German tennis star Alexander Zverev in a press conference last night, admitting that little if no players at the Open have been COVID tested? And he went on to say, and if more were tested, there would have been more virus found. Djokovic's stance are his own, and how others perceive them is also their own, and not for government control. Djokovic is no more a threat to civil order than Scott Morrison is as a Hillsong parishioner. Hillsong, many argue, is more of a dangerous cult than a religion. So why isn't Hillsong shut down? Novak has better immunity than the vaccinated, or at least as good, because he has had COVID. He is quantifiably one of the healthiest people on the earth, and he is not a health risk, and he was tested negative on arrival. And yet, the federal government and Scott Morrison are dangerous. Their campaign to mandate vaccines through coercion should be everyone's concern, because their agenda of control and power is unhealthy and dangerous to our freedoms. And why? Because Djokovic's beliefs didn't fit the government narratives. What a healthy 34-year-old Djokovic, who declines to take a vaccine for a virus that only kills in the minority, or a government willing to mandate it more dangerous. As Australia continues to descend into an abyss of economic, social and political gloom, despair looms, and the Djoke is on all of us.